Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to On the Other Side, Leadership After Transition. It is I, your host, Jeffrey Lodick. If it's the first time you're here, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you. If you've been here before, you're a repeat offender, and I appreciate your support as always. Hey, today it's a real special day for me. I mean, it's good to have great guests that come on, that want to come on, that want to share their stories and share time with me, share time with you. It's a good opportunity to learn from people's experiences, right? Today, it's really interesting to me, and we were speaking before the show. She's a trailblazer of sorts, right? And I'll get into her bio in a minute, but it's really interesting to live in times where things are for the first time. So, 1989, General Colin Powell becomes the first ever African-American Joint Chiefs of Staff. 30 plus years later, here we are, and we're just getting into where we're having the first African-American general or staff, senior officer of the Air Force. And we have the first ever senior enlisted advisor that's a female for the first time ever. And it's crazy to think that it's happening right now. I mean, 30, 50, 125 years ago, maybe, but not right now. And it's just good to see progression. And I'm really excited to be able to bring someone on that is one of those trailblazers. So I'm going to read her bio just because I want to make sure it's great and correct, because I want to encapsulate what she's done. And she's the president and CEO of the Leader Transition Institute and founder of Changing Focus, Moving from We to Me. Annie Bragg is a U.S. Army veteran of 10 years. She was one of the first 100 women assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, earned her senior parachutist badge, Jumpmaster, right? And received a direct commission to the Medical Service Corps, where she became a MedEvac helicopter pilot. Annie has been an Air Force spouse for 32 years, homeschooling two daughters, one through ninth grade, the other through high school, as their family PCSed across the U.S. and Europe. She is a past chair of the Harford County Commission on Veterans Affairs and serves in the Transition Liaison, Maryland Council of Chapters, Military Officer Association of America. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to bring on Miss Annie Bragg. Annie, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Hey, oh, you're welcome. Thank you for sharing your time with us. I mean, I'm truly honored. Thank you and humbled. Did I do you service with the bio? I get to read, and sometimes, my English no good. So I just want to make sure I hit all the points correctly for you.
It was awesome. Sometimes when people say what I've done, I think, who is that person? Because I don't feel like I've done and I've crammed everything into my life so far.
Sure.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I tell you, when I had the opportunity to meet you, virtually, I guess you'd say, I was really astounded by the things. I mean, just to see one of the first 100 female paratroopers in the 82nd, right? It's crazy to me because, and like I said to you, you're not like 150 years old, right? So, so it's not like something that was so long ago. It's relatively new, and it's crazy to think that in a very short period of time, went from the first 100 to now it's just growing and growing and growing. And you're a pioneer, and I appreciate it. And thank you so much for your service, because you paved the way for all these paratroopers that are out there now, and it's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And the truth is, I was really an accidental pioneer. I didn't mean to be the first. I wasn't looking to be the first, and I really ended up in the Army by accident. So.
I've heard now. See, we're gonna have to go. See, I don't know if you wanted to, but now we're gonna have to go that route, because I've heard people say I ended up in the military on accident, and I love the stories that get us there. So how did that happen? Go ahead, give me the story on that one.
Well, it's a little convoluted. So I was a military brat. I was an Army brat. Went to German kindergarten, came back to the United States at Fort Bragg, the first time that I lived at Fort Bragg, and started, theoretically, I was supposed to be in first grade. The teacher decided I had learned too much in kindergarten in Germany. They put me into second grade. Progress a few years farther. My father retired from the Army, got his PhD, and moved to a small New Hampshire town to teach at a university near there. And there were 62 people in my graduating class in high school, just to give you an idea of the size of the school. There were no AP classes back then. This was the early 70s. And and I was bored. And so I did high school in 3 years, but that was where my first accidental trailblazing moment came, because I was lucky enough to get accepted into Dartmouth College in their second class of females. But I was a brand new 16-year-old at the time when I went off to college. And have you ever seen the movie Animal House, Jeffrey?
Oh, who hasn't? If anybody hasn't seen that, there's a problem. That's a great movie. That was you.
It was. Actually, the people that wrote it kind of tagged it on the fraternity that I became a member of. And I literally have been down a flight of stairs in a grocery cart. So I did everything at Dartmouth except for academics. I didn't do much in the way of academics because I didn't understand that that studying was something that took effort. And so at the end of my second year, they kicked me out because my GPA was a 1.42. And
Wow.
so, yeah, not impressive.
You sound like me. You sound like me there, Annie.
So when you have a college professor for a father, that is even less impressive. So you've been accepted you've gotten into college before you turn 16. You're kicked out before you turn 18. So I finished up at the University of New Hampshire, and then I had this brainy idea. Finished a double major there, political science and psychology. And in my time there, I had done a summer internship on Capitol Hill for one of the New Hampshire senators. And I just absolutely loved it. He promised me a place on his staff when I graduated, but there were a whole lot of things that happened that didn't come true. And when I graduated, I had no place to go because my parents were traveling around the world, had rented our house out, and I literally had nowhere to go. So I got in my car. I actually had my parents' car because they let me at least take their car while they were gone, and drove myself to Washington. My father had made arrangements with a colonel on active duty that I had never met before, but they had been captains together years ago. And so I showed up at the Cox's doorstep and said, "Hi, I'm here." And the idea was that I would stay there until I got myself a job, which in early 1979, with a bachelor's degree in psychology and political science, I always say it might as well have been underwater basket weaving.
Sure.
Because I didn't even type well enough to get a job as a secretary. Yeah. So, but every day I took the metro from Northern Virginia into DC to go. You had to go in person to apply for jobs then. And so, but every day I walked by an Army recruiting office, and even though my father had been retired for, I guess, about 13 years by then, I had always gotten military health care. My mother had driven an hour and a half one way to go to the commissary at Pease Air Force Base. We got our health care at Fort Devens. So when I walked by and saw these men in uniforms, I was like, "Oh, that looks familiar," and I was really scared. In Washington, knowing that I had to do something. I mean, the Coxes weren't going to let me stay there forever. They hadn't said that, but they weren't adopting me. And so I went in one day, and I was a recruiter's dream. So right now the Army is on this big recruiting push. They're looking to recruit, I think, about 10,000 people this week across the country. Well, I was like the best person to the recruiters over that time period, because I walked in, I took the test. I'm smart, so they told me I could basically have any job I wanted except for like combat jobs. And we figure the one thing that I remembered from Dartmouth was that computers were in big air-conditioned buildings, and I didn't know much about the Army from being a military kid, but I just knew that. I asked, "So is there anything I could do with computers?" And so the recruiter told me that I could be a combat telecommunications center operator. But unfortunately, I missed the word combat. I just heard telecommunications center operator. So I thought, "Oh, this is great. This is going to be fun." So I went home, told Colonel Cox what I was going to do. He was like, he just rolled his eyes. He called the recruiter and answered a bunch of questions, and the recruiter lied successfully, like they do. And Colonel Cox said, okay, very good, very good. He sent me back the next day. I took the physical, I passed it, and I went back the third day. Actually, I didn't go back there. I drove to Fort Meade, Maryland. They let me park my car in a secure place. And I went into a building and I raised my right hand with, 25 other people. And then they put us on a bus to the train station in Baltimore. And literally we took an overnight train to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And that was how I ended up in the Army. That's why I said it was an accident.
Well, that's pretty quick. I mean, hey, they wanted to get you out. They needed that number. That's good. Just so you know, on contrary to you, I was not the recruiter's dream. He came to my house 3 times, and every time he came, the third time, I actually was there. But when he came, I ran out the back door, and I finally was. I mean, I just, I was one of those guys that I definitely was his nightmare, and it worked out that I got to get in, but surely wasn't his favorite customer, if you will. So you get to Fort Jackson, you do your basic training and all that good stuff there. Tell me a little bit about your time that when you were in the Army, what the things that you did and stuff.
So I stayed there for 4 days. My very first night in the Army, I learned how to work a buffer because the IG was coming the next day. So that was like my first big Army thing. I remember learning to work a buffer. And then they 3 or 4 days later, they put us on a bus to Fort Gordon. That was when they had 1 station unit training. And so I did my basic training and my tech training there. And that was a winter that it snowed in Georgia over the winter. And I can remember in January, somebody pissed the drill sergeant off, and we were low crawling around the barracks outside in the snow with our weapons in our arms and no field jackets, nothing. And so that was exciting. And I went from there to jump school. So the big thing for me was that when I was talking to the recruiter, they said jump school, had just opened to women. And I said, oh, that sounded like fun. So I said I could do that. And so I did that. But the helmet that you see on the shelf behind me there, it's symbolic of my helmet. When I graduated, I had letters and numbers all around my helmet. And that's a whole nother story. But it took me 9 weeks to get through jump school. Okay. I didn't fail anything. Mm-hmm. But I got hurt. I got sick. There were cycle breaks. Yep. And so they were so impressed by me, they decided I should become a black hat. This 5 jump commando should become a black hat because I was a woman and they were trying to show that off, and I had perseverance. And so that was an experience. I was there for about a month as a black hat, and that was when people ask me about my time in the military, getting accepted into that job. Something happened to me that has stuck with me this whole time. And I had to go for an interview, and I went to the headquarters for the interview, and it was at 1 o'clock. I got there just at the same time that the sergeant major was getting back from lunch, and he realized that I was there to talk to him. And we were walking in the parking lot, and he said some words to me that have stuck with me ever since. And he looked at me, he said, well, at least you're pretty. I'm like, really? Oh, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So, but I got the job. But what happened was that it turned out that the commanding general at Fort Bragg knew my father. They had been captains together. And so I had sent my father a letter. He was in the middle of Africa when he found out I was in the Army, and he was not a happy camper. So he reached out to his friend at Fort Bragg and said, so where's my daughter? What's she doing?
Yeah.
And so he pulled me out of Fort Benning to go to Fort Bragg. And I was fortunate enough, my paperwork said to go to the 82nd. That was what my contract said. But because enlisted women couldn't be assigned to the Signal Battalion, they wanted to send me to 18th Airborne Corps, but I agreed to retrain. And that was where one of the first things I learned about the Army was that I could do anything that I put my mind to, because I cross-trained to be a 71 Leva and admin clerk. Then I learned all the PAC NCO responsibilities, and along the way, I taught myself and earned the MOS to be a battalion legal clerk. And so that was my enlisted time. And so it was really different. I loved my time in the 82nd. I'm really proud of that time. I was one of the first, actually was the first enlisted female from the division to go to the primary leadership development course there. That was an adventure.
Yeah.
Well, because they told us we had to to get in our dress greens for an inspection. And they were really upset when I refused to wear a skirt because I didn't wear a skirt.
Right.
In fact, I didn't have an Army skirt that fit me. I had a uniform skirt that hung on a hanger in my wall locker, but it was like a size 14 because that's what they issued me when I got to basic training, and I was about a 10 at then, an 8 or a 10, and I fit into my pants. And so they had to call back to our battalion to find out why I refused to wear a skirt. And they said, oh, she doesn't wear a skirt. She wears pants. And oh, by the way, she blouses her boots.
And there you go. Jump. Airborne all the way. That's great. That's awesome.
So yeah, so that was good. And that's where I developed some self-confidence. I didn't have any self-confidence before then. So my big claim to fame is I did graduate as an honor graduate, but it wasn't easy. I had probably the hardest thing was trying to learn how to march troops around. Have you ever had experience doing that?
Oh yeah, quite a few. I was a drill sergeant and so just so you know, up to this point, our paths are similar, except for I didn't reclass. But I mean, every single place you went on the way, minus Fort Jackson, I went to Knox. It's very similar. And so airborne school right after AIT and all that good stuff. And I went to 18th Airborne Corps, so I didn't go to 82nd. So similar paths at that point. But oh yeah, I've had to march troops around quite a bit.
Well, the learning of it is not as easy as I thought it would be, and I had a really good platoon the day that I was supposed to, to do this. We had to turn a corner, and they did what they knew I wanted them to do. And our instructor stopped and said, "Oh no, you don't do what she wants you to do. You do what she tells you to do."
Yep.
So I literally marched them into the side of a building. Have you ever seen a whole platoon of people pile up on the side of a building? They literally walked off the asphalt, down the little green ditch, and up against. I laugh still, as you can see today, every time I think about that.
Of course, it's awesome.
So it was an adventure. I was fortunate enough to get a direct commission and carry on a family tradition. My father had gotten a direct commission way back when, and ended up in the Medical Service Corps, and then ended up in pilot training. And that was only because I thought, well, the opportunity presented itself, and I could drive a car, so I could learn to fly a helicopter, right?
That's awesome. So what did you fly? What helicopter did you fly?
Well, I ended in 60s. I was among the first pilots that flew the 60s. And that was a real adventure. When I went to the transition, that was when I was there the first time for the transition, that was the last time, the class before me was the last time that the rotor blades flew off a UH-60, and we lost anybody because of that. Because there was a problem with the UH-60s when the military bought them, and the Air Force and the Navy bought the modification, and the Army didn't. And the problem was that the rotor blades would fly off in flight.
Well, that's not a positive thing. It really doesn't help flying at that point, right?
No. So it was like 3 days before I was supposed to get in the aircraft. So they had us sit there for 6 weeks while they were trying to figure out what to do. Then they sent us back. I was in Germany at that point, at Landstuhl, the heliport there. And so I guess it was 4 or 6 months later, they sent us back to Fort Rucker, put us back in the transition. And then we finished up, and I flew back and finished out in 60s.
Okay, that's outstanding. It was, by the way, his favorite aircraft to jump out of ever. I love 60s. They're some of my favorite ones to be in. So when you exited from the military, you were as a pilot at that time. You were leaving the military as a pilot, or what were you doing?
No, actually, another little twist in my story. I was supposed to have gotten out with I had an ETS date, because back then you started out with a reserve commission and you had to apply for a regular commission. That's the way unless you came out of one of the service academies. And so I was scheduled to get out. I had no clue what I was going to do, not a clue in the world. And I ended up spending a week with one of the general officers who ran the the Army Medical Corps. I escorted him around Garmisch for a week. Real hardship tour. I'm sorry.
Rough.
General Rumbaugh. He was a wonderful guy, and spent a week with him. And my commander, things that were really challenging there. Landstuhl was not a great assignment. Some of the enlisted soldiers and crew chiefs and medics, they were awesome. The officer corps was a little challenging there. So, well, we won't talk about that tonight. But at any rate, I had this chance to spend a week with General Rumbaugh. When he found out that I was leaving the Army, he said, "That's ridiculous. You need to stay on active duty." So he got me a year's extension. But at that point, my replacement was on his way to the unit. So I actually spent my last 10 months as administrative officer in the clinical support division of what was then the Landstuhl Army Regional Hospital.
Okay. Outstanding. So, which is still there, by the way, which is pretty interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're an administrator. You got your extension for a year, and you're about to leave the military.
Right.
And you decide that I'm going to be a helicopter pilot outside of the military, and I'm gonna be good to go, and everything's gonna be great. Is that what happened? Is that the end of the story, or there's a lot of differences in that?
No, it twists and turns again. So after I got my extension on active duty, that's when I met my husband, and he was an Air Force officer. Okay. So we ended up getting married, and I decided the way the rules work, I'm a big one for figuring out how the rules work and making them then work for me and helping other people then make them work for them. Well, I had figured out that if I applied for my regular commission and didn't get it, I had been on active duty long enough that I would get a $30,000 bonus to leave the Army. And I thought, well, that'd be like really good. So I put in for the commission. Darned, I hadn't pissed off enough people. And so I got it, and I had to turn it down. But I did that because based on Jeff's career as an aircraft maintenance officer and mine, I had been a captain for 2 years the day he pinned on first lieutenant, which was the day we met. So our careers were going to go in separate ways. So sure. I turned down the commission and I got out. We were married in the middle of June, and I got out at the end of September. And I'm a much better planner now than I was then, but there were no transition programs, Jeffrey. Nada. Mm-hmm. I barely had time to clear. I had to squeeze my clearing in among my work because my boss didn't give me time to clear. They weren't really happy that I was getting out in the first place. Mm-hmm. They were, and so here all of a sudden I was an Army captain one day, and then I was an Air Force spouse the next day. And everybody that I knew was at work. My hubby was at work. And it was like a crash and burn. It was, it was like running full speed, full tilt in a marathon and then coming to a screeching halt because there's a wall in front of you.
Sure.
And it was, once again, I hadn't planned. We were going to move from Ramstein to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. We moved there. I got out at the end of September. We moved there in mid-December. And so there wasn't, a reason for me to try and get a job. And it was awful. I went into a funk. When people talk about being depressed and not knowing where they're going when they get off active duty, I've been there. I have literally been there, and that's why I am a big one with changing focus, moving from we to me. We encourage people to participate as much as two years, 24 months before they leave active duty, so that they can start to get a handle on who they are, the mindset shift they're going to make, and start to create a plan for it. I can't tell you how many people I've run into who are doing the same thing today that I did then, and it's just like, oh gosh, I don't.
And you wonder, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because I've heard the stories of no transition programs, and you hear a lot of folks that even complain about the transition program today, and I've talked to folks that were in the transition program in 2000, and they talk about how bad it was then. And I mean, just because it's growing, right? And so mm-hmm. I don't believe it's ever going to be perfect, but for everybody, right? It's perfect for somebody. But anyway, at the end of the day, you look at where you're at, right? And you say there was no program. There were no virtual jobs. There weren't a lot of this type of conversation where you could do this right here, interacting with people, whether it be on YouTube or Facebook, or even just you and I having a conversation, because the very first time we met, it was a virtual meeting in which we got to talk through Zoom, right? But at the end of the day, it's really crazy. And that's the second time I've said at the end of the day, by the way, this is a thing that my brother and I work on, because he says it all the time. He's got me saying it. I hate saying it. So I know he's watching. His fault. Anyhow, but I do appreciate or I don't appreciate so much how I see people struggling in the same sense that they were struggling when it was there, when there's so many more resources. I just think that there's so many resources sometimes that it's a lot of noise and people don't know how or where to actually go first, right?
Right. And they don't, and there are so many nonprofits and programs that are doing it, I've talked to the transition officers at both Army, Air Force, and Navy installations in the last 2 years, and they have so many programs that come to them and say, here, will you promote us, that they don't even do it anymore because it's just too confusing for the people. And so that's we are pretty much getting our word out by word of mouth, by people who have been in the program, so that they can talk to the people that they know. And now we have tools like LinkedIn. We didn't have LinkedIn back then. So yeah, so so then I crashed and burned again when we got to Eglin, because we were in a TLF for 31 days. It would have been 30, except our furniture didn't get delivered the day we signed for our house. Came the next day, so one more night in the TLF, and then being very naive, and my husband really not knowing any better, he suggested that maybe I shouldn't get a job, because we would only pay so much more taxes because of the extra income, because he was still just a first lieutenant then.
Right.
And he didn't want to pay the taxes. So I said, okay, honey, whatever you say. Poor guy. I don't know. I was not cut out to sit at home. And I think, anybody who has spent any time, in the military, whether it's 3 years or 8 years or 20 years, when you come to a screeching halt, you are used to going 100 miles an hour. And so for me, once again, to be in a house, not knowing anybody, because a lot of the wives worked, I didn't have much in common with them. They were befuddled by me. And so, I was still struggling. I will say I was in the transition process probably for 15 years, the first 15 years of our marriage. So I did a lot of volunteer work. I worked with the Spouse Club doing big volunteer jobs. I worked with the Red Cross doing big volunteer jobs on Eglin. And then we had 2 daughters, so that became a full-time job. And in the process, I became a Mary Kay sales director, because I decided I had to do something for myself. So so
I like that. I like the fact that you said something that's one thing. I like everything you've said. I've loved it so far. But you said the transition for 15 years. It's really interesting. Some people have this idea that I work. I mean, I'm in the Army or whatever branch of service. I get a job and now I'm transitioned, right? But transition is so much more than employment, right? There's so much more involved than just getting a job. So the fact that you said, and it's like a self-admitting thing, but it's important to know that the transition is a process, and it can be excessively long. It can be forever, really. I mean, at the end of the day, especially depending on how attached you were to your service, but it can be, because it's psychological, and it's all those things actually play a huge role. So I appreciate you saying that. That's
and that's what people don't understand. We call it the transition assistance program. We call it transitioning from active duty. The transitioning part is all up here. It's a head game. That's when you have finally moved from having a military mindset to having a civilian mindset. That's when you have completed the transition. The rest of it, it's called a change. Yep. It's called a change of job, maybe a change of where you live. But it's not a transition. The transition is up here.
Sure. Well, the good thing for me is that after 20 years, I had never transitioned into the military mind. So when I got out, it was simple. No, that is a joke. But hey, it's interesting because just by talking or hearing your story, you talk about personality and the things that you weren't really cut out to do, i.e., sitting on the couch. I mean, you had a really good career. I mean, you were on your way to doing some amazing things had you stayed in for 20, 30 years and not accepting the direct commission. Could have been a thought of what if I'm upset about this decision. It could be rough, but 32 years of marriage, I think you made the right choice, right? I mean, that's just me saying it. I mean, you've been together with your husband now 32 years. That's pretty impressive. So my opinion only, great choice.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I will tell you, when people ask me, do I regret it? I say no, because I would not be the person that I am today if I hadn't been through these last 32 years. Jeff has let me grow myself while he has been, a very good Air Force officer. And we were at Eglin for 6.5 years. We went back to, from there, we went to Fort Bragg. I've been at Fort Bragg 3 times in my life. I've been as a child, a soldier, and a military spouse. And from there, we went to the Navy War College in Rhode Island for 10 months. And we went back to Germany. So I've done that 3 times too: child, soldier, spouse. And then we spent 2 years out at Hill Air Force Base, and then spent 3 years at the Pentagon. And we're fortunate enough, I made a decision along the way to homeschool our daughters, just because my husband was so obsessed with being the best Air Force officer that he could be. And his airmen loved him for that, but we didn't get to see him a lot. And I figured out, if I could control their schedule, they could maybe know their father. And we were moving around. So we did that. And then I had the opportunity to do a couple more big volunteer jobs. I ran the Girl Scout program in Stuttgart, Germany during the 2001-2002 school year. And that was a real growing experience for me, because that was 9/11 happened. And we had 4 military installations in the city of Stuttgart. I had 21 Girl Scout troops. Well, we started with 20. We grew, and I grew it to 21 troops among these 4 installations. Okay. And I was able to use everything that I had. One of my additional duties at the Landstuhl Heliport was I was the physical security officer. So as soon as everything was locked down, I was calling the Stuttgart security people and saying, okay, can I come to your briefings? I need to find out what's going on, because I have these several hundred girls that need to do stuff, and I need to figure out how to keep them safe to do it. So I was able to use what I knew to be able to keep the program going. And we were the only extracurricular activity for kids that stayed going that year. And grew the program. So I'm really proud of that. I'm still connected with women who were Girl Scout leaders then, and our daughters are still connected with the girls that they made friends with on the different concerns. So that was a really growing experience for all of us.
Oh, for sure. It sounds great. What I'm going to do real quick, and for all y'all watching right now, if you're liking this, hit the like button, the love button, the share button, whatever you want to do. Hit any button you want. If you want to hit the angry face button at me, it's okay too. You can do that. At least I'll know someone's here. And what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, Miss Annie, I'm going to throw some comments up there just so you can see them. We won't have to discuss them too much, because I want to stay on pace, but I want to make sure that we're acknowledging the folks that are talking, because there's quite a few comments that are being made. I just want to throw out, obviously, Trish wrote that your persistence still shows in your work today. You have a lot of folks out here. Just so you know, I like this comment. It's Trish again, but she loves it. She doesn't wear a skirt. She wears pants and blouses and boots. I love it. Marina, excuse me, love attending Changing Focus. I really like that Marina had commented on the post that we shared when we first started the promotion of this show. And it's a great thing to hear what people say about you. In those things I get to learn. I'm kind of entering your network and seeing the good people that are actually you're impacting their lives regularly. And I appreciate what you're doing, because it does impact those lives. So that's good. I kind of want to ask you, as we move into your transition, as we're talking about it, something that what did you do that was a good thing to help you as you transition, and I want after that to counter that what was a bad thing, and what advice can you give to folks that are going through the process to kind of steer away from and or attack that individual thing that was good for you?
So the thing that I can identify that I did well was that I was open to any opportunity that presented itself. So that since I didn't know what I wanted to do, I tried lots of different things and found what I was good at along the way. I found that I'm good at managing a program. I'm good at motivating. I'm good at leading groups of people, but I'm not so good at always at being still staying home. I want to stay busy. And so I knew that whatever I do has to be a busy thing. And still what I didn't do well during the transition was that just the lack of preparation during this whole time, even the 15 years, when I say it took me 15 years, I still never had a plan. Yeah, I mean, how stupid can you be? At some point, I learned in everything else that I was doing to create a plan, but I never took time to make a plan for me. And that's one of the things that we focus on in Changing Focus, is helping people to create they create their purpose statement and then create a vision plan for the next 3 to 5 years, so they have a clue as to where they're going. And we talk to them about, when you get close to where you're going, you need to do this process again, because you never want to attain a goal without having the next goal already out there. And so that was the big thing, was I planned for lots of things, but I never planned for myself.
Well, it's interesting. And you said something earlier, which we had a panel, a Transition Talk 2020, which, by the way, because of how good it went a few weeks back when we did Transition Talk 2020, there'll be Transition Talk 2020. We'll have another panel in a few weeks in July, so it'll be good. But Rob Campbell had made mention, of something you said, and I really like it, is that you said using 24 months to figure out who you are, right? The Army's asking, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? The Air Force, they're all asking, what is it that you want to do? But what they're failing to do is find out who you are. Because when you discover who you are, you can then put yourself in a place to do the things you want to do, because it aligns with you, right? You kind of have a feeling of, what is your purpose? What is your belonging? Where do I belong at?
Right. Well, let's be straight about it. Okay. I'm a person, I really believe in honesty. And the reason why the military services don't focus on who you are, because you know what? They don't care. Because the transition programs exist to minimize the amount of unemployment money that they have to pay back to the 50 United States that are saying, hey, pay for this person's unemployment, and pay for this person's unemployment, and pay for this person's unemployment. So their return on investment is to get you employed so that they don't have to pay that money back to the states. So there's no return on investment for helping you to get your head straight. Although there should be for what our service members, what we gave to the United States military, there should be an opportunity for kind of a reverse basic training to start the mindset process, the mindset shift.
It's interesting. I've heard that. I mean, I've been in so many conversations about you go into basic training for 2 months to inculcate into the military to get yourself situated properly for military life. But after a certain amount of time, you might have to go back and do that again. And it's interesting because the conversations I've had for maybe 4 or 5 years, and maybe, I mean, there's organizations out there that are trying to get that, but the funding obviously is an issue, right? Because that's, again, and how are you going to do that? Because time in service, you wait till they're out, but then they're not employed anymore. So there's obviously some obstacles in facing that, but it's still a great point. It's a great discussion to have because it's, again, progressive, to help the folks to identify who they are. Because, again, a lot of folks that have again, the transition, you say it's all up here, which I don't argue with. So therefore, that up here is what has to kind of be worked through, right? So it's a very good point. I like it. It's
Thank you.
Right on point. So now we did our transition. We talked a little bit about some of the things you did wrong, some of the things you did great. And now I kind of want to discuss what you're doing now, because you've made mention of a couple things that are like our seeds planted to the things that you're doing now. So if you could tell me about what you're doing now, what is it that you do?
Okay. So about, I guess, 4 years ago now, I got the idea that we should create a program for people who are moving from active duty to the civilian sector that would help them do this mindset shift. Because in 2011, I became a member of the John Maxwell team, and I'm a certified coach, speaker, and trainer. I'm actually an independent executive director with the team. And so I started really getting deep into studying mindset then, and I realized that was really important. And I went to a 4-day program, and as I was going through this program, I said, I could create something like this for service members. And so during my time period there, I actually was making notes for myself. I knew how I could take the format and turn it into exactly what Changing Focus is today. But I I thought, well, who's going to listen to me? Who's going to do this with me? How are we going to fund this? I was just, it just boggled my mind, and I was scared. And so I actually sat on it for 2 years until a friend of mine said to me, so when are you going to do something with this program? And that's when we jumped. And so changing focus actually it's 4 years. We're 2 years old now, but 4 years in the making, and it is designed to focus on service members and their spouses. It's ideal when they can come together to start to make that mindset shift. And so we also talk about communication. We talk about financial habits and mindsets, because those affect our transitions. And we do some extra little hands-on interactive stuff, but we spend 24 hours over 4 days. And what my idea was that we would travel around and do this live. And we did that 4 times, but it's very expensive to do it that way. And because we're new, people just didn't come knocking down our doors. And so we would spend all this money and go someplace and sometimes only have 2 or 3 people show up. So then comes along COVID-19. But through my time in the John Maxwell team, we had built programs virtually, working with people around the world. Our first year in the John Maxwell team, I was one of 10 people that put together a youth leadership program. And we would get on freeconferencing.com, and I was the one who was responsible for leading the calls. I wasn't in charge of the program, but I was the behind the scenes. And so we would have people on from New Zealand and South Africa and Mexico and Canada and all across the United States, the 10 of us. And so I learned to work in the virtual environment. And then I lucked into a master's degree program at George Washington University back in 2012, where they had decided that they wanted to do something that was a combination, what they called it a hybrid. Some online and some in the classroom. And so by the time March rolled around, I was like a pro in the virtual sector. And so I was just like, well, let's just do this. And Lefford and Erica were like, really? Do you know what you're doing? I was like, we can make it work. We can make it work. And so the most exciting thing to me is we are serving in some cases 4 times as many people each month as we were before. We are serving people across the United States in places that we never would have gotten if we were going to do a live program. And that's what's most important to me. So we've cut down our costs substantially. We mail boxes of supplies out to them because they need to have what they need to have. But still, even with all of that, we've cut our costs substantially. But I'm really excited to know that that we're serving people in Hawaii and Alaska and New York and Florida and Texas and in Illinois all at the same time. So we've actually changed our model now. Now we've decided that we're doing it 11 times a year. So we're going to do 9 of them virtually, and then pick some larger areas and do a live one, 2 live ones during the year in a large area.
So I'm going to share your the link right here, your website, and I love the fact that you're doing things virtually. So I'm a big like I support that. I don't believe in 2020, kind of like the first female anything in 2020 we should have already been past that, right? There should have already been, and now here in the virtual space, technology has existed for all this time. And so these things it's great. So, applaud and kudos to you for taking a program and being able to use this to spread it to the places that are, somewhere other than, because where are you calling me, or where are we talking to from, right? Where are you right now?
So I'm just north of Baltimore, Maryland.
Outstanding. So I'm just south of Tampa, Florida. So virtually we're able to do this, right? And I'm sure that there's listeners that are from the West Coast to the East Coast, north to south. We have a large group of folks that are listening to us. And I think that technology can't be limited, that we have to take advantage of it. And there's people that truly need your message and your training. And one question for you, and I'm going to keep that up there because I want people to go to that site. But So your virtual training is like, if I go to a TAPS program or whatever the case may be, it's 5 days, Monday through Friday, 40-hour block of instruction, and it's good training. It is what it is, and it's what you put into it, right? Now, for you guys, after your 24 hours of 4 days of working, is that it, or is there more things that
No.
follow? Okay.
No, it's key to stay connected with people. We all need that. And so afterwards, we do everybody does a communications assessment that they learn a little bit about during the program, but I do individual 1-hour debriefs with them afterwards. And then we have monthly training and coaching sessions that are virtual, and we live stream them so lots of people can learn from them. Excuse me. And then I keep the recordings available for our alumni to have access to. And then we have a podcast. It's kind of limping along right now, and I'm going to learn some lessons from you along the way, and we're going to go forward with the podcast. So and then also we really do. I'm not a good writer, but I'm a really good editor, and I know how to do resumes. And so I spend a lot of time with our people afterwards, walking them through getting their resumes straight so they can get those all important job interviews. So we try and stay in touch on a monthly basis.
So that's great. I love that. I got to tell you, I support a lot of groups, right? So I'm one of those folks that and I won't say any groups out loud because I think it might be, I'm loyal to people that are doing the right thing for the right reason, to do the things for our veteran community, right? And for those groups, the ones that I've found to be successful aren't the in and out the organizations. They're the ones that we've created a relationship. I'm teaching you some things, and we're here throughout and consistently. So there's follow, there's feedback, and there's growth. Because at the end of the day, I think, man, I got my see, he's in my head now. That's 3 times I've said it. So Dave, you're winning anyhow. But I do know that there's people that are really benefiting from these programs that are helping them grow, and it's amazing. I really appreciate the fact that you set it up to have follow-ons and having conversations to help them through those situations, whether it be through resume writing or interview skills, financial understanding, because that's, I believe that a lot of us service members, regardless of enlisted officer or respective services, there's a lot of folks that don't have the financial literacy that is needed to be actually very successful, not to be successful, but to be very successful financially upon leaving the service. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
And I want to add one. Thank you so much for that. I want to add one more thing on. One of the things too that makes our program different. I think some other programs are starting to do this. So I can't say that we're the only ones who do this, but we're one of the very few. Is veterans of any era are welcome to attend Changing Focus. We have had a couple of people come through the program that separated from the military 25 years ago. And it was life-changing for them. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of them because that was a really big step for them to come and say, hey, I need to rethink this, tweak my life a little bit. And so that was really bold of them to come. But it's really important because not everybody, we need some help along the way. And if you don't get it, you just don't have it.
Sure. And I think that it's amazing. Like you said, 25 years ago, I don't think the transition program was really moving that far forward. So anything that can help to prepare to leave is significant. I think that I think the DOD, regardless of intent, has done a pretty good job of at least giving you the basics, right? So, I mean, and it's good. And it's the onus of each individual to kind of go out and further themselves and educate themselves. But so to understand it, see that you're available to those folks, it's awesome because it gives them some glimmer of hope and use the things that they have because they've served their country. It's nice to have that opportunity. All right. So I'm going to move a little bit. I'm going to shift a little bit to asking you about some leadership stuff, about what do you think you gained while you were in the military from a leadership perspective through your time, not just as a child, a military brat, not just your time in the uniform, as well as your time with as a military spouse. What leadership characteristics, traits, or just things that you learn that kind of makes this, what you're doing right now, fit for you?
Okay. Well, first of all, what I gained from the military was that I learned that I could do anything that I put my mind to, because that's why I came into the military thinking I couldn't do anything, because I couldn't get a job. I had failed out of one school, spent 2 years at another, and then I couldn't find a job. I ended up in the military because I couldn't find a job. And so what I learned was that I can do anything I put my mind to. I made it through basic training. I made it through jump school. I made it through Jumpmaster school. So and then I learned to fly a helicopter. 3 different kinds actually, because we started in the TH-55. Something's wrong with this. In a TH-55, we went on to the Huey and then went into the Black Hawk. So I learned, so that when it finally, when my friend said to me, so when are you going to do this? I finally realized, why shouldn't I? I am capable of doing this. And that's one of the things that makes veterans so important. I saw Daniel Savage had a comment on LinkedIn earlier today that he had finally understood that that military veterans are really good for startups.
Sure.
Because we can be it doesn't bother us to be a jack of all trades. It doesn't bother us to dig in and ask the questions and find the answers and make something work really hard. So and that's I think really some key things. And one of the things I learned along the way was not to take no for an answer.
Yeah. That was easy, right? I mean, the problem is how you want to know how to get to yes, but no is easy because there's no work after it. Meaning if I say no, I owe you nothing in response if you ask me, right? But getting someone to get to yes there's an art to it, but it's also having to meet someone halfway, is to figure out what it is to get me to get you to yes, because I'll even do the work for you if you just say yes. But you're right. It's not taking notes for an answer.
And those, that's not stuff that's special to me. That's something that all military veterans bring to the civilian sector, and those are soft skills that a lot of people who just spent their lives in the civilian sector just don't have.
Yeah, it's one interesting thing about you saying that from a startup perspective. Obviously, I mean, I'm involved in a lot of different veteran entrepreneurial type programs, and I really love the fact that the veterans want to be entrepreneurs. I wish more would want to be, because it's just that they have the ability to do it. A friend of mine a long time ago was telling me about an interview in which he had, and someone asked him what could he do, and he said, "What do you want me to do?" And that wasn't the desired response, right? Obviously, there's some things to that, but at the end of the day, it was very, very eye-opening to me, is because when you go to an organization and within the military, it doesn't matter what your MOS is or your job is, because you can be all the additional duties, and there's things that are expected of you regardless, and you don't say no, you say, okay, got it, Roger, driving on, whatever the case may be. So when you do get to a job out this way, what do you want me to do? I will do whatever it takes to make this job good, and I'll take his job and her job and their job, because I've done them all. So the entrepreneurial route it makes a lot of sense, because the chaos that ensues is actually sometimes peaceful, right? Because we're always doing stuff.
Exactly.
That's awesome. I love it. All right. So Miss Annie, I'm going to ask you one last question, but before I do, because the question I ask everybody, it's my favorite part of the show. But before I ask that question, I want you to tell me if there's anything else that you, is there anything that you want to hit on that you haven't got an opportunity, that I just want to put it out there for you to put it out any kind of way?
No, I really appreciate the time. Thank you. I mean, we've been talking for almost an hour. I'm so sorry. Something I seem to do well. I
didn't even know.
No, I really appreciate the time to talk and share my story. And I think hopefully people can see a little bit of themselves in me, and know that they can too be successful.
Sure.
That taking 15 years is okay.
It is okay. And I love that. I truly do understand that, people compare chapters. I heard someone say, and I don't want to quote anybody because it's irrelevant to me at this point. I'll look it up later, but you can't compare chapters of life, right? It's basically my chapter 5 is not your chapter 5. Where we're at can't be comparable. It's okay to take your time and do your thing, but it's at the transition is transformation, right, of the mind, understanding where we're going. So that's great. I do appreciate you. And talking for an hour, Miss Annie, it feels like we've been talking for 15 minutes. I could talk to you for days. Truly can. If anybody wants to see meet with or connect with Annie, please do so. Go on LinkedIn and find her there. Annie S. Brock, very helpful, and she is truly posting great value daily, weekly. I mean, it's just always, it's there. You see her name. I was telling her before we started the show, before I met her, I'd seen her name, but I wasn't really engaged. I just saw it, but it was kind of one of those things that came and went. But after her and I connected, it's just constant. It's not because she's in my feed. It's because she's been in the transition space just the same amount of time I have. And she's always putting those great things out there. So anybody want to get connected to her, look her up on LinkedIn and find that website. It'll be great. The question I have for you is the one I like because I'm a humorist, right? It doesn't have to be funny either, by the way. I just enjoy stories in which you can't make this stuff up, right? So there's always the story in the military time around where if we were to tell someone we were with, they wouldn't believe us. Like my brother I've told him a million stories, and he constantly tells me I'm full of nonsense, right? But I want to hear a story that you have from the time that you served, that if you told just someone that never was a day in the military, that they would enjoy.
Oh, okay. There are a couple of them. First of all, I will say that I served in the military before the Kevlar helmets. So when I was in basic training, we sometimes had to eat. When we went out to the field in training, they wanted to teach us how to be real grunts. So we had to eat in our helmets. We had to put our food in our helmets. We took our helmet liner out, put it on our head, or and then they would serve us in our helmet. Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything because I came in the Army after the steel pots and the metal helmets weren't around. So I have a whole bunch of friends that I spend time with, and they always tell me that I'm the young one, right? Because I call them the old guys, right? But the stories in which I hear about the steel pots are always fun, and they're enjoyable because I didn't experience it. But those experiences are what make our military so great. Technological advances, but just the idea of what you went through and how you went through it. So in airborne school, I'm going to talk to you later about your helmet, because although I had a roster number as well, my last name is comical to everybody in the world. So I was never my roster number in any school I've ever been to. They called my last name, I guess, for their own humor. But anyhow, so Annie, I truly appreciate you being here tonight. For anybody that wants to listen to this on iTunes or any other podcast player, she'll be available next Monday. I think it's the 6th of July. So I'll take this from here, edit it, and we'll put it out there so you can listen and enjoy the conversation to and from work. Or if you want to listen to any other episodes that I have, you can go out there and listen to it as well. But Annie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for what you're doing for our community. And I really appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for allowing me to come on and share my story. I appreciate it. And thank you for doing this for everybody, for getting people like me on to be able to share their stories and what they're doing. It's a huge service.
I appreciate it. And I love doing it. I get to learn so much stuff. Every time I have a conversation, I feel smarter just by being here. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to slide Annie out for a moment, and I'm going to talk to you for only 1 second. Thank you so much for stopping in and listening to this interview. If you want to hear many more, go to iTunes and you can find all of my interviews there. If you go to On the Other Side Leadership After Transition, the Facebook page, it looks, wrong hand, but see this little sign. If you see that sign, I'm going to get my hand. There it is right there, right? Not the Yankee sign, but the On the Other Side sign. Find that anywhere, and you can listen to me on Stitcher, iTunes, go to YouTube. I've just created a YouTube channel, so there's the people that don't do Facebook, they can do YouTube now as well, so we can enjoy the conversations. Got a good packed schedule coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Herb Thompson will be here next week. I got a great panel that'll come out here in the next couple of days. I'll put that out there for everybody to see. Another Transition Talk 2020. Great, let's get some great information from some transition veterans that all of you've heard of and you've seen. So we'll make sure that we bring them on there. And please post questions. Go on to the Facebook page. If you want to hear something, post a question on there prior to the interview. And what I'll do is I'll take those questions and pull them out, and then I'll ask the panelists or even our individual guests that come on. So thank you so much for taking your time, spending it with me tonight, and Andy as well. Until we see you next time on the other side. It's supposed to end right now, but I didn't hit the button quick enough. Take care.